Welcome back, everybody, to the A Little Less Fear podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Lino Martinez. Today, what an honor to have as a guest Michael Hingson. He's a New York Times bestselling author and international lecturer. Michael, blind since birth, survived the 9/11 attacks with the help of his guide dog, Roselle. This story is the subject of his best-selling book, Thunderdog. Welcome to A Little Less Fear podcast, Michael.
Thank you, Lino. Good to be here.
Excellent to have you. So yeah, for people that are listening in, tuning in for the first time, Michael's also a podcaster. He's got his own podcast, and I was on his podcast about 3 weeks ago, and it's really amazing how now you get to be on my show. So this is really awesome that we get to connect again. Thanks so much.
This could be trouble. I grilled him. Now he gets to grill me. We'll see.
I love it. I didn't mind. I didn't really feel grilled. I mean, it really,
I know.
I love the way that our connection flows and even love how close we are because I'm in Pasadena, California, and you're not too far from me.
How much rain did you get this past Sunday?
Oh, wow. We got a lot of rain. Did you get a lot of rain?
Not as much as we originally thought because the track shifted a little bit. So we probably got 2 or 3 inches, but not as much as I thought we would. Of course, for those listening, we're talking about Tropical Storm Hillary that came through last Sunday. So we did pretty well here in Victorville compared to other places. Of course, there's always the Coachella Valley. They really got hit.
Oh, yeah, I heard. It was pretty incredible. But now the sun is shining bright.
It is.
Back in alignment with the happy sunshine feeling.
It's 83 outside.
Feeling that beautiful warmth. You know what? 83 is a lot better than 93.
Yeah.
Hey, so Michael, tell us about your journey, and you can start wherever you'd like to start. You can start from childhood, or you could start somewhere in the middle, just wherever you feel most comfortable.
Well, as you said, I am blind. I've been blind basically since I was born because I was born 2 months premature and put in an incubator with a pure oxygen environment that caused the retina to malform. So I've been blind my entire life. The doctors told my parents that they should send me away to a home because no blind child could ever grow up to amount to anything. And my parents said that was crazy. Of course, he could grow up to amount to whatever he wants to amount to. And they brought me up with that attitude. So
I love that attitude.
I think I was really encouraged to have a pretty powerful can-do type attitude as I grew up. And my parents let me explore. And so in a sense, they were risk takers because they let me walk around the neighborhood when I was born in Chicago, but we lived there for 5 years and then moved to California. But even in Chicago, walked around the neighborhood and so on. And then out here, rode a bike and did all the things or a lot of the things that other kids did. I never really worried about being blind or not being blind, and never really, was allowed to have a why me attitude, but it wasn't really so much wasn't allowed to have it, is it just never was something that I thought of because I was me. Anyway, I went to school, went through high school, public school, went to college at the University of California, Irvine, got a master's degree in physics, worked at the campus radio station for most of the time I was there, was program director 1 year and had a lot of fun with that. And really just did the natural sorts of activities that I could do, and then went out into the workforce. And that eventually, as you pointed out, led me to be in the World Trade Center. But early jobs were jobs that had me doing a lot of traveling around the country to first work with a guy named Dr. Ray Kurzweil, who developed the Kurzweil reading machine for the blind. It was the first device he invented. He actually invented the ability for cameras to scan pictures of pages, feed the information into a computer, and then the computer could recognize the print. He didn't invent optical character recognition, but what he did develop was omnifont optical character recognition. That is to say, the ability for a machine not to care about the type style, number of type styles, or print styles on the page. So he was able to make a machine that read print out loud, and then he expanded that to be more of a commercial product for scanning thousands of pages for lawyers and book publishers, banks, and anybody else that needed to scan stuff. So I worked with him and the National Federation of the Blind to create a project and run a project that would allow blind people around the country to use the machine and actually make recommendations as to what needed to go into the final version of the first
That's incredible.
production model. So it was a lot of fun. And then I went to work for Ray and was there about 8 months when I was told that I was going to be laid off because I wasn't a revenue producer, unless I'd be willing to go into sales and not sell the reading machine, but to sell the data entry, more commercial machine. And I decided I'd do that because I knew that at the time, and still very much the case, the unemployment rate for employable blind people is in the 65 to 70% range. So when I hear about unemployment rate for the national population of 3.5, 3.6, that's really lovely. How come it isn't that way for us? And it's not because we're blind. It is because people think that if you're blind, you can't do stuff. And that prejudice and that attitude still exists. So anyway, I did sell, and then the company was purchased by Xerox, and all of us were let go because they wanted the technology, and I had to find other jobs and did. Sometimes actually starting my own company because people wouldn't hire a blind person. It didn't matter what my resume showed, they wouldn't hire. So I did that. Then I finally was able to go back to work for a company, and that company eventually transferred me to New York because I was selling to the East Coast from the West Coast, and we were selling primarily into the Wall Street environment. And Wall Street basically takes the position, if you're a manufacturer, we want you to have boots on the ground here. We'll buy from your reseller partners, but you need to have a manufacturer's presence here. So we did. And I opened an office for the company I was working for in California, and then later was recruited away a couple times and opened offices for other companies. And eventually that led me to open an office for Quantum Corporation on the 78th floor of Tower 1 of the World Trade Center.
The 78th floor?
78th floor.
Oh, 70th.
78.
78. Oh, okay, wow.
So, yep, pretty high up there. And so that's where we were on September 11th. We were going to be doing some seminars to teach some of our reseller partners how to sell our products when the building was attacked, and of course the world changed forever.
Sure did. Michael, what do you remember about that day?
So I was in my office at 8:45. The last thing we had to do to prepare for the seminars was to send a list of all the people who would be coming to the Port Authority security people so that they had a list to go by. If you wanted to come into the tower and go to a company or into an office, there were two ways to do it. You could go to the desk and show them your ID, and they would call up and say, so-and-so is here, are they welcome to come up? Or if we were going to be doing like what we were going to be doing, and that is hold a seminar where there would be a lot of people, we faxed a list. And they, whenever anyone came, they could compare the names to the list, which had to be on company letterhead. And if your name was there, then they would let you come up. So I was literally reaching for letterhead when the plane struck the building. And literally what happened is that the building began to tip. Tall buildings like that are flexible. They're made to move around like in a windstorm and so on. Mm-hmm. And so literally the building began to tip as I'm tipping my hand right now. We moved about 20 feet. And then we came back to a upright position again. But the issue is that we didn't know what happened because the airplane, of course, hit us on the 96th, roughly 96th, between 93 and 99th floor on the other side of the building from where I was. Of course, people always say, well, you didn't know what happened because you couldn't see it. You know, people ought to get real and get a life. No one where I was and on my side of the building knew what happened.
Yeah.
It wasn't an eyesight issue. It was the fact that we had 18 floors of concrete and steel and a whole building between us. And the reality is that what happened was that we didn't know. And in fact, I didn't know for sure. Well, I didn't know for sure what happened until both buildings had collapsed. On the way down the stairs, I smelled burning jet fuel, and I'll get to that. But basically, the building tipped and then came back. And it was in a vertical position again, and I met my guide dog who had been under my desk, Roselle, coming out from under my desk. I took her leash. And then we went to, I told her to sit, which meant to come around, and to heel, which meant to come around on my left side and sit, which she did. And then about that time, my colleague David saw that there was fire outside of the building. And we heard stuff. We actually heard sort of shuffling outside the window. And as he described it, it was millions of pieces of burning paper falling outside the window. So what happened was that we knew we had to leave. We had guests in the building. I told my colleague David, get them to the stairs and then come back and we'll leave, which he did. And so he got them to the stairs. I called my wife to tell her that something had happened and that we were going to be leaving the complex. And David came back, and then we went to the stairs and we started down, and still not knowing anything about what happened, you know. And so we got to the stairs, we started down, and I began smelling an odor, and it took me a couple of floors to realize I was smelling something that was very familiar. And after about a total of 4 floors, I realized I was smelling the fumes from burning jet fuel, and I observed it to other people around me. So we all assumed, well, maybe for some reason, whatever, the building was hit by an airplane, but we didn't know. And we didn't know it was deliberate, of course. We didn't know how big of an airplane or anything. But we continued down the stairs, and we eventually made it down to the bottom at about 9:35. We went through the complex, and they wouldn't let us go outside of the building to the outside and our tower. We had to go through to the far side of the complex, as far away from the Twin Towers as we could be. And then we were able to leave. Of course, what we didn't know is that people were jumping from up above, and if we had gone out, we would have been right below where a lot of things were going on. So it wasn't a good thing to do. So we got outside eventually, and then my colleague David noticed that there was fire in the second tower. Now, I should explain that for me, and of course people say, well, you couldn't see, so you didn't know what was going on, and they ought to get a life, as I said before. One of the things that I did when I started working in the World Trade Center was spend a lot of time learning the whole complex. I learned where things were. I walked around with a white cane rather than my guide dog, because guide dogs will go around things that I want to know where they are, like kiosks and so on, the shops in the middle of the floor, in the shopping mall on the first floor of Tower 1, or actually the space between the towers. So I learned everything I could. I consulted with the Port Authority, police, the fire people, emergency preparedness people, and the whole idea was that I wanted to make sure that I knew everything that I could know about what to do in an emergency, because I was the leader of our office. I was responsible for anybody who might be there if there were ever an emergency. And of course, there had been an emergency in 1993, long before we moved into the Trade Center. Somebody had bombed it, and in the parking lot, the parking garage on the 4th sublevel. Didn't do a lot of damage, but nevertheless, it happened. So I wanted to know, because I knew that if something happened, one of two things might be the case. Other people would be in the office and they could see, but they may or may not be able to read signs depending on whether there was smoke or not. Or I might be in the office alone because I wanted my staff to be out doing the things they were supposed to do. So the bottom line is that however it was, I needed to know what to do. And what I didn't realize until later was, by really studying all of this, I developed a mindset that said, you know what to do in an emergency. Yes, something could have happened where the building could have just started collapsing around us and nothing could do about that. But most likely, I would have the ability to react. And so I developed a mindset essentially that said, you don't need to be afraid. You know what to do in an emergency. And it clicked in on September 11th. So the bottom line for me was that as we were going down the stairs, even after the plane hit the building, and David saw fire. David Frank, my colleague, saw fire outside, and people were panicking. I kept trying to tell people, slow down. And eventually David actually said, you don't understand, you can't see it. And the problem wasn't what I didn't understand and couldn't see, because he told me what he was seeing outside. It was what he didn't understand and what he wasn't seeing, namely a dog who came out from under my desk, was sitting next to me, yawning and wagging her tail and not giving any indication of fear. So she wasn't sensing anything that bothered her, which told me again, whatever was going on wasn't such an imminent issue that we had to run and panic to get out of there.
Mm-hmm.
And that lasted the whole day. That kind of a mindset said you can control your fear, you can control what's going on in your mind, and you can deal with what comes along until you can't. But we never had a until you can't moment.
Michael, I have a question about that. So you can control your fear type mindset, type attitude, which is incredible, and I love it. But I'm wondering what you were feeling as you were hearing these sounds, because I can imagine it was chaotic. And even though your dog is wagging, Roselle, correct? Female?
Roselle, right.
She was wagging her tail, and you really had adapted or adopted the mindset of you can control your fear. How do you control your survival, your automatic cortisol levels going up, your survival mechanism going skyrocketing? I can imagine that physically your body knew that there was some type of danger. So how were you able to maintain being calm aside from hearing the chaotic environment that was going on around you?
Well, the reality is, going down the stairs, we didn't allow chaos to ensue. Several of us were pretty focused. And when somebody would say, you know, we're not going to make it out of here, we would deal with that and keep panic from coming on the stairs. Mm-hmm. Look, no matter what your physical reaction, and sure there was a physical reaction. I mean, for me, the evidence was that clearly I had a major adrenaline rush that lasted most of the day, because the next day I was stiff as a board and could hardly move. Clearly things had calmed down, but that whole day I didn't feel tired, and I just did the things that I needed to do. But that's a physical reaction. But even then, ultimately, what I really try to teach people today is, while you may not be able to control specifically what happens to you, you always have control over how you deal with what happens to you. And so when I talk about having developed a mindset that said you can control your fear, yes, there are physical things that happen, but your physical reactions are also oftentimes greatly altered by your own mental fears and your own loss of mental control about what's going on around you. Mm-hmm. And that's the point that I'm trying to make, and the part that I deal with is that what happened in the World Trade Center on September 11th to each of us was something that we didn't have any control over occurring, but we do have and did have control over how we dealt with it. At one point, when we were outside, we were fairly close to Tower 2 when it collapsed. And so then everybody ran. And I mean, we're like 100 yards away. The building was coming down. If it had tipped over, we would have been under it. Yeah. And I turned and ran. But even then, I worked to try to keep focused as much as I could. And that was probably the physical time that things were the scariest. But even then, I said to God, why did you get us out of a building to have it fall on us? And the bottom line is that even so, I knew that what I needed to do was to work with Roselle and to run, and did. And so we focused, we ran, and we survived, because no matter what, you can control how you deal with all the things that happen to you. Yeah, physical reactions. Yeah, adrenaline. Yeah, right. Heart beats really fast. Oh, yeah. No doubt about all that. But it doesn't mean that you can't learn not to be, as I call it, blinded by fear, and that you can learn to use your fear as a powerful motivator and tool to be aware. So all that physical reaction for me helped me be more aware, or if you will, hyper aware of what was going on around me. And then I took that data and used it to analyze what I needed to do at any given time.
That's incredible, Michael. That's really incredible. I just, what's even more incredible is mentioning how the next day you felt stiff as a board, and I can imagine physically your body really felt drained from your
Mm-hmm.
senses just being sucked out and depleted. What did you feel and what did you think after the news started to come out days after, weeks after, even years after, and you started finding out more of the facts and then realizing that you survived such an horrendous accident? I mean, what kinds of things went through your mind?
Well, we knew early on, that is, after both towers had collapsed, I called my wife, and she's the one who told us how 2 aircraft had hit the buildings, one the Pentagon, and a fourth plane was missing over Pennsylvania. So we knew it was a terrorist attack. And a couple of thoughts went through my mind. One, how could anybody do this to people? And as we learned, and as people said, these people think that they're going to go to Allah and they're going to have 72 virgins waiting for them. I doubt it.
Yeah.
But what I also learned was this wasn't a religious attack. This was an attack of a bunch of thugs who wanted the world to do what they wanted. This is not what any organized religion that truly believes in God would do, and that includes
Exactly.
Islam. It's not a Muslim thing. It is a fringe group. You could equate it to the Crusades and the Christians in 1066. But the bottom line is that I think I realized at least that this is just a small group of people. But even so, how could anybody do what they did? Well, they did do it, and so that was something that we had to deal with. So it was pretty much an awe. Well, I don't want to say awesome. It wasn't that, but it was a moment that really gave us pause to go, what does man do to man or woman to woman? It's crazy. So it was something that I still was and still something that I think about how that could happen. But I also remember for a while after September 11th, how unified we were as a country.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
wish that we could go back to that. But unfortunately, a number of events happened that politicians just wasted it all and shouldn't have. But nevertheless, that's what occurred.
Michael, did you experience any type of PTSD or nightmares after the incident?
I had a couple weird dreams, but no real nightmares. No, nothing like that. PTSD, I'm sure, to some degree. But ironically for me, one of the things that happened is that the media learned about my story and wanted to interview me. And my wife and I talked about it, and we agreed that if it would help people move forward from September 11th, if it would help people learn more about blind people, and that we, as well as anybody else, could be anywhere at any given time. And if I could teach people about guide dogs, it was worth doing the interviews. And ironically for me, talking to so many people from the media, dumb questions, smart questions, intuitive questions, very shallow questions, but all of that helped me move on, because when something happens to us, if we don't talk about it and just bottle it up inside us,
Right, right,
that will
right.
affect us too. And
Absolutely.
so the media, ironically, helped me more than anything else. I mean, I had crazy questions. I had one guy who called me up on Thursday the 13th, and he said, I want to interview you, but I want you to wear the suit that you wore when you went to the World Trade Center on September 11th.
Whoa.
Well, that's crazy, and
Yeah.
it was, and
How did you
so
respond to that?
I just said, well, the suit's in the cleaners. Well, thanks. I don't want to talk to you then, and clicked and
Yeah,
he
no
went
kidding.
away.
Right.
Um, so that was unfortunate. But the reality is all of those questions, especially the really thought-provoking ones, help me move on from it and move
Mm.
forward.
What types of thought-provoking ones?
Oh gosh, I wish I could think of a specific thing. People would ask me um, to describe what what I heard. Why do you think that this actually happened? Was this a concerted attempt to overthrow the U.S. government, or there were a couple conspiracy theorists, and some people said, well, why did the building tip? Why didn't it just fall over? And I spent time learning about how the building was designed. And the reality is both buildings behaved exactly as the architects and engineers expected them to. They pancaked straight down, they didn't tip over. They bent and flexed because tall buildings like that are made to do that in windstorms and so on, much less being hit by an airplane. When I learned that it wasn't the airplane hitting the building itself that caused the buildings to collapse. We had a situation in the 1940s when a military aircraft hit the Empire State Building, and it didn't cause it to collapse. What caused the buildings to collapse was the infrastructure damage done by, in each case, 26,000 pounds roughly of jet fuel exploding in addition to hitting the airplane, in addition to hitting the building. Right. And that's what caused them to collapse.
Michael, I can imagine, I mean, I'm just trying to put myself in a situation like that and kind of just thinking as you're telling the story. And I'm wondering if anytime have you asked yourself why you survived and so many others passed away?
I have not. A couple of times I think my mind could have gone there, and my response to me and to everyone else is, look, worry about what you can control, don't worry about what you can't.
Yes.
And the reality is that since I did survive, I don't know what the basic plan is necessarily, but I do know that I'm here. What can I do to help make sure this doesn't happen again? What can I do to move forward to inspire people and educate people and help people? And that's the approach that I took. If we deal with survivor's guilt and we deal with why me, where does that get us? It doesn't get us anywhere.
It gets us in the hole, in a negative loop.
It doesn't mean that we can't think about those kinds of things, but that's not what we should be focusing on.
Sure.
And so while I could ask myself those questions and I didn't deal with it for long periods of time. I didn't focus because the fact is that I did survive. Why did a whole bunch of people not survive? They were up above where the fire, where the crash sites were, and couldn't get out. Why were they there? Don't know. A lot of them. But the bottom line is, for me, I did get out, and I chose to be able to use my experiences to hopefully inspire others and help them realize that all of us can be in unusual situations. And the question is, have we developed enough of an inner toolbox that we can deal with whatever comes along? Have we learned how to deal with our fears? Have we learned how to move forward and focus our efforts in such a way that we can prevent these kinds of things internally from causing us, as I've said before, to be blinded by fear?
I love that, Michael. I got to say, I probably would have thought that because, as you know, since I revealed on your podcast and people listening for the first time, I survived a rare genetic disease, close to 50 surgeries in 10 years. And some of the times when I was in the hospital where I was, what I say is dying a very slow death, I did ask myself, well, how am I surviving and other people don't have a chance? And what is it about my life, or why me? Why me? But then I realized, why not me? And then that's really where the motivation goes in for me to change my mindset and continue forward. I'm just, it's just really incredible how perseverance can push through. And speaking of perseverance, how do you define perseverance? What does perseverance mean to you?
I think that perseverance mainly, to me, is that we should always try to move forward. If we are having a problem moving forward or dealing with an issue, we need to step back and look at it and find out why we're not able to move forward and figure out what we need to do to make it happen. And maybe the answer is that physically we can't move forward at that particular instant in time. That doesn't mean we should be impatient. We need to look at what is going on around us. We need to look at what's occurring in our own lives. And we need to make the decision of how to proceed. Those are internal mental things, and those we can always do. And I think that's part of perseverance, recognizing that we have control over our lives. We may not have control over everything that occurs to us, but we always, absolutely 100% of the time, have control over how we choose, at least mentally, to deal with things.
Yes, absolutely. And if people aren't able to, what kind of advice can you give them?
Um, I'm in the process of writing a new book about learning to control fear. Um, and we're basing it on my story in large part, and working with 8 guide dogs over the years since 1964. And what we talk about a lot is how being part of a team can help you, because teammates help each other, they support. And team can be a blind person and a guide dog. It can be someone else and a guide dog. It could be you and your pet if you develop that kind of a teaming relationship. But working with other people is always invaluable. And so one of the things that I would advise people who are not necessarily able to, or think that they can't move forward and think that they're being stymied, they should step back, really look at what's going on, why they did whatever they did on any given day, analyze it, see how to move forward, see what they could do better. Even the things that went well, could we have done those better? The things that didn't go well, they're not failures. The problem with failure is that we think it's such a negative thing. Failure is just an opportunity to learn to do better.
Yes.
And so I don't tend to like the idea of failure. But the point is that you won't learn any of that if you don't stop, take a breath, and analyze and be introspective in your own life. And that's something that we should all do every day. Take time at the end of the day, take time at the beginning of the day, but really take the time to look at yourself and and let yourself tell you what maybe needs to be better. I have learned over the past couple of years in doing our podcast something that I think is very important. I used to say a lot when I listened to my speeches when I would travel and speak, and I still travel and speak, and I'm always looking for speaking opportunities. I record my speeches and say, I'm my own worst critic, so I want to listen to my speeches because nobody's going to tell me what to do like I can.
Right.
I've realized that's wrong. The
Oh,
reality is I'm not my own worst critic. I'm my own best teacher, because only
oh, I
I
love
can
that.
only I can really teach me in the long run. Teachers can advise and help, but I have to be the one to teach me and learn. So what I've learned is I'm my own best teacher, and I like the positive approach that brings.
I love it too. And it feels incredible to say that too. I am my own best teacher. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, going back to being introspective, how can people become or be more introspective?
You have to physically and mentally decide to do it. So before you go to sleep, just sit on the bed or in a chair or whatever, and think about the day. Specifically force yourself to think about the day, the good things, the bad things, and ask yourself questions like, gee, how can that go better? What should I do to make that be better? Or that went really well. Why did it go well? And what can I do to make it even better? And ask yourself the questions, and don't force yourself to just take the first thing that you think pops into your head. Listen to your body, listen to your mind. You will get answers. And the more of it you do, it's like any other muscle. The more you practice at it, the better you'll develop it, and the better you'll be able to be at really getting good answers about what to do when something happens to you.
I love that, Michael. How can someone listen to their body?
Well, again, it's always great if you get quiet. Um, and feel, take your pulse, or just listen to your pulse, or feel what your body is doing. And if you feel tense, why? Ask yourself, what am I worried about? I'm sitting here quiet. Why should I worry about this? Oh gosh, my boss doesn't really like me, um, and they might let me go. So what do I do about that? And analyze that and think about it and ask yourself questions. And does it mean I need to go look for a different job? All these different kinds of things don't need to evoke fear reactions. They evoke thought reactions that help you think about what your path ought to be.
I love this, Michael. This is incredible because too many people are just stuck in fear, not wanting to think about anything because it's going to rise in fear. But fear and going towards the fear is actually going to open up a window of opportunity for you.
Well, again, the issue is use fear as a tool, use fear as a motivator,
Yeah.
and use fear as something to help you move forward. It's not saying don't be afraid, but it's saying use that emotion to help you make better decisions. And the more you analyze fear in yourself, the more you will look at what is it that's really bothering me here? Why is it bothering me? What can I do about it? And the answer is, even if you physically can't do something about it, whatever it is, you certainly mentally can decide that you will deal with it and strategize about how best to deal with it.
I have a
You know,
question.
in June of 1984, I got a letter from the company I was working for, literally the last Saturday in June, saying, we're letting you go. And I was the last person to be let go. That was actually Kurzweil's company. It had been purchased by Xerox, and they wanted the technology and not the people. So I was the last sales guy to be let go, but they still did it. I get this cold FedEx letter on a Saturday morning.
Mm-hmm.
Look, how do you react to that? First of all,
Yes.
if I were a boss, I would never send that kind of a letter on a Saturday morning. I wouldn't do it on a Friday. I wouldn't give somebody the whole weekend to complain and suffer about it. I'd do it on a Monday, but that's a different story. But for me, I actually knew that there was the possibility of it happening. I didn't have any control over that letter coming. The company was 3,000 miles away. I had been asked to move back to California to help the company integrate into Xerox, and I did. So I had no control over that letter coming, but I did have control over how I decided to deal with it. And my immediate reaction was, got to find another job. I'm going to go look at options and see what we can do, but that's what I have to do.
Mm-hmm. So when you received such a cold letter, your reaction was how to move forward rather than staying stuck in a reactive zone.
Yeah, because we can do that. We can learn to do that in our lives, but we
Right.
have to practice at it.
Oh
You know,
yeah.
for me, being a blind person, being told all my life that I'm blind, so I'm not nearly as competent as other people, helped build up some of the defenses, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
But that's only something that goes so far. The bottom line is it's something that affects all of us. We all have challenges. And what we need to do is to learn to know ourselves and how to move forward in the best way for us with whatever challenges come along.
Absolutely. Oh man, I love the way you think and I love the way you talk, Michael. You really definitely inspire me to just keep going here and face fears because some of the things that I experience as far as fears and I feel that this is pretty common just being a human being. We're all experience some feelings of like lack and I'm like, where is this even coming from? And I am very introspective. I meditate 2, 3, 4 times a day.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes, Michael, what I experience was that's tough for me is even though I can pinpoint and understand that that's not true and it's a false belief and it's a fear that doesn't really define who I am, somehow that fear still pops up. So I find myself being challenged by completely eliminating that feeling. And do you find that that's ever even possible to eliminate such a feeling like that?
I
Or is
don't
it
think
always going to take me coming back, being introspective and asking why?
Well, I don't think that you can eliminate it. It isn't necessarily asking why. It could be what do I do now, or okay, I recognize this is happening, um, and I do want to look at why I'm still feeling that way. But the other part of it is, am I missing something else? You have to be open to exploring.
I love that. Am I missing something else? That's a question I have not asked myself. Rather than keep asking why or asking my higher self, I haven't actually asked, am I missing something else? That's a great
Or what am
question.
I not thinking about? Yeah, those are, the issue is that's what introspection is all about. It is opening your mind to let what needs to come in come in.
Yes, absolutely. That's amazing, Michael. Michael, let's talk about your best-selling book, Thunderdog. Tell us about Thunderdog. Is it exactly what we just went over as far as the 9/11 attack, surviving it, and Roselle helping you go down 78 flights, or is there more to the book as far as what would a reader get overall from the book if they were to read it?
So Thunderdog started actually when it was suggested to me that I should write a book about my experiences, and I started making a lot of notes, but it didn't come together. That was in 2002, and it didn't come together really until 2010. I met Susie Flory, and she said, I'd like to help you write a book. And she did, and that became Thunderdog. Her agent became my agent, and we created the book. He sold the contract, and we kind of went from there. The story, or the whole book layout, is that we start each chapter with an event or an occurrence on September 11th.
Mm-hmm.
Then we go back into my life prior to September 11th to talk about things that I learned that would help me cope with that particular event or occurrence. Then we come back at the end of the chapter to continue the story a little bit. Then we go to the next chapter. So it's not a September 11th book. It's not a September 11th story. It's a story of trust and teamwork, me and a guide dog, Roselle. It's our collective stories. It's a story of recognizing that humanity does what it does to each other and to all of us. It also says any of us can be caught in an unusual situation that we don't expect, but again, we can learn how to deal with it. And it's a story that I think also helps people learn a lot about blindness and blind people, because people think blind people aren't capable. I've had so many people tell me, well, of course you didn't know what happened on September 11th because you couldn't see it. And as we pointed out earlier, excuse me, the last time I checked, Superman and X-ray vision are fictitious. Nobody on our side of the building knew what was going on.
Right.
And, the reality is it doesn't really matter whether you can see or not. The issue is mentally how each and every one of us deals with things. It talks about the teaming relationship between me and Roselle, and that my job was to tell Roselle I was okay so she could do her job. What's her job? A guide dog's job is not to lead a blind person. I hear it and see it all the time. Oh, the blind guy was led down the stairs by his guide dog. Absolutely not. What happened was that, and what does happen is that a guide dog guides. I give the dog commands. I tell the dog where I want it to go, left, right, forward, or whatever. And the dog will do that as long as it can. The dog's job is to make sure that we walk safely. So if something comes up that stops us from going, then the dog will stop. And I have to figure that out because the last time I checked, dogs don't speak the same language we do. So I have to figure it out and then give the dog commands appropriately. Perfect example, Tower 2 collapsing. I turned and started running with Roselle back the way we came to get away from the collapsing tower. Mm-hmm. We were running down Broadway. We got to Fulton Street. We turned right, now west on Fulton Street, started running. And actually, my friend David had been with me, but he ran. It turns out he went the same way, and I caught up with him. We kept running, and then we were engulfed in the dust cloud, all the dirt and debris of Tower 2 collapsing. And suddenly, being in all that dirt and dust, we knew that we had to get out of it, otherwise we'd perish. So I kept telling Roselle, right, and giving her hand signals. I don't know whether she could see my hand signals, or I didn't know, and I didn't know whether she could hear me. But suddenly I heard an opening on the right, because what we wanted to do was to get into a building out of all that dust.
Yeah, out of all the
she obviously knew what I wanted. She turned right, she took one step, and she stopped, and she wouldn't move come on, Roselle, keep going. She wouldn't move. And I realized she must have stopped for a reason, and she did. She was at the top of a flight of stairs. She stopped doing her job absolutely perfectly. She kept us safe, which is what her job was. So
Wow.
she got a lot of hugs for that, and a lot of praise.
Yeah.
And then we went down the stairs. But all the way down the stairs in the tower, I kept telling her, good job, Roselle, good dog, keep going. Because I had to convey the message to her, I'm okay. I'm not losing it. I'm good. She had to sense the fear that was going on around us, right? But
Sure.
for me, I had to convey, we're okay. Let's keep going.
Right.
And when I did that, she in turn stayed focused. And so we worked together as a team and survived. So that's part of the message of the book.
That's an incredible message, Michael. I can imagine that Roselle got tons of attention as a result of all this.
She's won a number of awards. She won the award for canine excellence from the American Kennel Club. She received what's called the Dickon Award from the PDSA in England, Pet Dispensary for Sick Animals, that awarded medals for animals that fought in wartime. And the last one before Roselle and another guide dog named Salty got awards, and a shepherd search and rescue dog named Apollo. Before those three dogs got awards, the last time any animal had gotten an award was 1949. And so
Wow.
they got awards, and we kind of went from there. But the issue is Roselle's been pretty visible. She won the first award for Hero Dog of the Year from the American Humane Society when they started doing Hero Dog, I was going to say contests, but every year starting in 2011, they had an event, or yeah, I think it was 2011, maybe it was 2012. But they had these contests, and Roselle won the first year.
Michael, did you feel that your connection with Roselle was stronger and deeper after the attacks?
A lot of people ask that, and I guess that's a pretty thought-provoking question, and the answer is sure, because I made it so. I wanted to use it as a powerful building tool. Dogs don't do what if, right? So we went
Right.
home that night. I took her harness off, and she started playing tug of war with my retired guide dog, Linny. It was over for her because nothing threatened her. But
Right.
for me, of course, I think about it. So I used it as a way to even get closer and encourage her and just continue to let her know we were okay.
That's beautiful, Michael. And so, Michael, now you have your own podcast. Tell us about your podcast. How did that develop, and what's it called?
So in 2021, I was hired to work for a company called Accessibe, ACCESSIBE.com. Accessibe is a company that makes products that help make websites more inclusive and accessible for a lot of different people with disabilities. So accessibility is a very important part of it. And a variety of countries, including Israel, where Accessibe is located, have taken good firm stands on access. The US has done a pretty good job, although it could go further. But Accessibe in Israel started because the law said you have to make your websites fully accessible, and the guys who started it had been actually making websites for companies before the law was passed, and suddenly they were confronted with figuring out a way to get a lot of websites usable and accessible, and they did. And they continue to evolve, but they hired me as chief vision officer. And one of the things that while I was talking to the owner of the CEO of the company, Sheer Eckerling, he said, what are you doing now? And I told him I was learning how to do a podcast. He said, we want a podcast. We want you to do it. Would you do one for us? And I said, what do you want? And he said, I want something that would be relevant and inspiring to the world. It's not a commercial for Accessibe as such. We want people to think Accessibe is part of the world, and we want you to do something that would help make that happen. So in August of 2021, we started an unstoppable mindset where inclusion, diversity, and the unexpected meet. And it literally is written that way, and the tagline, inclusion, diversity, and the unexpected, is deliberate because if you ask people to define diversity, they won't include disabilities. They've already screwed up diversity. So My point is, we're not going to let you do that with inclusion. You're not inclusive if you don't include disabilities. If you say, well, but
Right.
we are, we include people of different races. That's great, but you're not inclusive. You don't include disabilities. So you're either inclusive or you're not. There's no middle ground. Either you're going to be or you're not. So it's
Sure.
inclusion, diversity, and the unexpected. But we don't focus on just disabilities or anything like that. The purpose of the podcast is to hear different people's stories, like we heard yours,
Yes.
and to have conversations with people, to talk about their lives, talk about their stories. And it's not an interview as much as it is a conversation, as you know, where we talk back and forth and ask questions and can go off on tangents, which is fine. But the idea is we want to show listeners that they can be more unstoppable than they think they can. And so
Yes.
that's what it's all about. If people want to listen to it, they can find it anywhere podcasts are available. They can also go directly to my website, www.michaelhingson.com. That's michaelhingson.com/podcast, where they can find all of our episodes and they can listen to them. Whoever listens, we hope they'll give us a 5-star rating and on iTunes or wherever they're able to rate the podcast. We appreciate that. But people are welcome to listen to it. We have published, as of today, 155 episodes, so it's a lot of fun.
It is a lot of fun. And it was a lot of fun being on your podcast too. You're really easy to open up to and really easy to talk to. Thanks so much
Well,
for
I,
that platform. I had a great
well, I
time.
want it to be fun.
Yeah,
And that, as I told you, it's all about having fun and making it worthwhile for everyone.
definitely worthwhile. Where can our audience find your book, Thunderdog?
Anywhere books are sold, you can go to Amazon, Barnes and Noble. It is available wherever the world has it. It's available through Audible as an audiobook. It's available in large print as well. It's available in a number of different languages. I was just checking Amazon yesterday and saw that there were ads for the Swedish edition.
What?
It's available in a number of different languages, and so
That's amazing.
people can find it wherever books are sold, and however they're sold in whatever format it's available. You can even get it in Braille from a company called Bookshare.org. They print books on demand for blind and low vision people. They can print a Braille book.
Amazing. Michael Hingson, everybody here on A Little Less Fear podcast. You are your own best teacher. Love that. Use fear as a tool to move forward. Use that emotion to help you make better decisions. You can control your fear. And yeah, just really amazing here to have connected with you on your podcast and now you on my podcast.
Yes.
Thank you so much for sharing your incredible, courageous story and your incredible mindset that really pumps me up. And I'm certain that our audience is going to feel pumped up by this as well. Thanks so much for sharing all of your glory, your light, and your love, Michael.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it, and I hope that people will be inspired by it. They can also go directly just to michaelhingson.com or on the podcast page as well, michaelhingson.com/podcast. And if they want to reach out to me, they're welcome to do that. Speaking of fear, if
Yes.
anyone wishes, they can go to www.blindedbyfear.net, and they can download a free ebook that talks about fear and controlling fear.
Oh, man, I love that. www.blindedbyfear.net. Thanks so
Correct.
much, Michael. I look
Sure.
forward to keeping in touch with you. Thank you.
I look forward to it as well. Thank you. I was glad to be here.
It's an honor. Thank you.
Thank you.